Hi fellow fishers, welcome to my new series on beach fishing. This is actually going to be a series of videos where I cover core subjects which are foundational for beach fishing success. In this series I cover things like hook selection, what type of sinkers you should be using, choosing the right lines, fishing rods for off the beach, heavy, light and in between, fishing reels, all the gear that you need when you go down to the beach, and everything else that I can think of that will be helpful to you. I'm really excited about this because I know it's going to benefit a lot of people, and that makes me happy to think that I can pass on knowledge that I have to help you enjoy your fishing experience. In today's video, we are covering hook selection for beach fishing. In this video, I'm going to show you all the different hooks that I use when I'm fishing off the beach, and I'm going to explain why I use them and how to put the baits on effectively. What are the key factors in choosing a hook when you're fishing off the beach? The first key factor is, what is your target fish species? What are you aiming to catch? Because the size of a fish's mouth is one of the major factors in choosing a fishing hook. The fish that you're chasing doesn't have a small mouth or a large mouth. Obviously, if the fish has a small mouth, well then that answers the question of how big a hook you need. If you are targeting a large fish, well then generally you would be using a larger bait, which will mean that you'll need larger hooks in order to have those hooks and have the barb exposed in the bait. A wise fisherman once said, "Big hooks catch big fish, but small hooks catch all fish." Now that's true to a certain extent, because sometimes when you're actually fishing for a small fish, a really big fish will come along and sniff up that little bait and you'll get a shock. I know of a story of a gentleman fishing in Western Australia who was fishing for herring and using maggots for bait. So maggots are pretty tiny. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Anyways, he was using maggots for bait, catching herring, and all of a sudden he hooks this massive fish, which he fights for about an hour, and he eventually lands about a 30-kilo mulloway, which he caught on a maggot, on a tiny little hook. So anything's possible. And I had a recent situation where I was fishing off the beach, actually filming one of my videos, and I was using beach worms on light tackle, and I had a really aggressive bite, and the line starts peeling out, and at first I thought, oh, it's probably a salmon, but then pretty quickly I realized it was no salmon. It was much bigger than a salmon, and this thing's tearing line out, heading down the beach, and I just could not stop it. And before long, I've got hardly any line left on my reel, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I had to put pressure on it to try and turn this fish, but the line ended up snapping just before I ran out of line. And I estimate that that was a XXX size mulloway, because I've caught hundreds of sharks, hundreds of stingrays, and that didn't fight like either of them. It was just a really big fish. So things happen even when you're using small baits, but that's the exception and not the rule. The second key factor for choosing a hook with beach fishing is, what is your chosen bait and how is it going to be rigged? This is actually probably the number one thing. You've got obviously the size of the fish's mouth, but probably even more important is the bait you're using and how you're hooking it up so that you can catch the fish effectively. A critical factor when matching your hook to your bait is exposing the barb of the hook. This is super important because it means that you get a really good hook up on the fish. If the barb's not exposed, many a fish has been lost because the barb of the hook is actually embedded in the bait and not sticking out where it can hook into a fish's mouth. A good example of this is when people are using soft plastics or hard body lures. When you use a soft plastic, the barb of the hook sits really proud out of the soft plastic, unless you're using a weedless type. Also, on hard body lures, the trebles or single hooks are really exposed so that a fish can actually get caught on the hook. It's actually an old school of thought that you need to present a bait in a supernatural way so it looks exactly like it would be in the wild, and that fish can tell the difference, you know, whether there's a barb sticking out or not. But that's actually not true. Fish are not that smart. They're just hungry, really. There are a couple of exceptions. For example, if you're using worms for bait or nippers, exposing the barb of the hook is not critical because they are soft baits. As soon as they crunch onto it, they're going to get the barb anyway. And also with whole pilchards on ganged hooks, it's not so crucial about exposing the barb because pilchards are not a really tough bait. It's more with slab baits, squid baits, etc. that exposing the barb is really important. Another thing to consider when choosing your hooks is how sharp are the teeth of the fish that you are looking to catch. If the fish's teeth are really sharp, then you'll either need to use multiple hooks or a wire leader to prevent your line from being bitten off. This picture gives a clear look of the basic features of every hook. The fishing hook size scale starts with the smallest hooks around size 15, and then the hooks get larger all the way through to size 1 and then continue to get larger with 1/0, 2/0 and so on through to 9/0, 10/0, etc. I've come down to the beach today just for a general beach fish, have a bit of fun, catch some dinner. With my whiting fishing, I'm actually using a long shank hook. Now, I do something a little bit different to what other people do with long shank hooks. Most whiting fishermen use a size 1 or 2 long shank hook. I actually use a size 2/0, which is quite a bit larger. The reason that I use a 2/0 long shank hook is because I like to put a larger worm bait on, because if I use a larger worm bait, it just gives me more options to potentially catch bigger fish. And because I can still catch small whiting on a 2/0 long shank, if I happen to hook a Mulloway or even a big salmon, the 2/0 hook is going to work much better. So I actually pretty much exclusively use 2/0 long shanks off the beach when I'm fishing for whiting now. Also, I found that because I use a larger worm bait, I put more worm on and I actually thread it over the hook and onto the line, I tend to catch bigger whiting because I've got a bigger worm bait. But it still doesn't impede me to catch just your normal standard size fish. So this is just something that I've found over the years. I'd much rather use a larger, slightly larger hook so that if I hook a big fish, I'm going to get a better hookup. It's just a long shank hook. Yeah, it's a good size. Oh, the Bream! Oh, yeah. See, he's really well hooked. Look at that. Look in there. Hey! Let go of my finger. Hey! He's biting me. Had a fish on, but then I got weed. I've come down to the beach just for a quick fish for an hour or so. And nearly always when I go beach fishing, I take 2 rods with me. I take a light to medium rod that I use for catching bread and butter species like bream and whiting, and I always take a heavier rod that I like to put a big bait out on, just so that I've got the option of catching a nice Mulloway. And I put out a set line, I throw my big bait out, and then I fish with my other rod and just keep my eye on my big bait. And I've actually got here a small Tailor. In South Africa they call them shad. So I've got this small Tailor that I can put up on hole. I've got a 10/0 hook here, and all I'm going to do with this Tailor is just hook it through the jaw like that. So you can see there's heaps of barb exposed there. That's not going to come off because that's a really strong part of the fish, and I can chuck him out like that. Or I could actually cut this fish in half and let some of the blood and guts come out. Which, you know, obviously that puts a little bit of a fragrance in the water for the fish. So I actually think I might do that, because if I cut this tailor in half and just use the head half, it'll be easier to cast as well. That's a good dewy bait, and I'm going to lob that out. The only thing you're really going to catch on a bait like that is either a shark or a mulloway. That's about it. But you've got to be in it to win it, so I'm going to go and chuck it out now. And then I'm going to fish with my other line, just using some worms for bream and whiting. When you put a pilchard on a ganged hook, the top hook needs to go through the eye of the pilchard. Okay, so I'll line that up like so. So that means my first hook is going to enter the pilchard about here. So you put the hook in, pin it like that, swing that up around and turn that. Second hook goes in and through, and then the third hook goes through the eye of the pilchard as such. And so that is your pilchard bait on a set of 3 ganged hooks. I'm going to show you a simple way to rig a squid tentacle for mulloway off the beach, exposing the barb of the hook. I've got a 7/0 hook here. I'm actually going to put it into the squid leg, tentacle, and thread it a bit like a worm. So I've actually thread that hook into the squid tentacle like so, and then I'm just going to put a half hitch around the end when I've got my line tied on, and that's what it's going to look like. You can see the barb is well exposed. Now I'm going to match exact hooks with species of fish, and I'm going to show you the hooks that I use to target different species. When I'm using beach worms for bait, I use a size 2/0 mustard long shank hook. I've been using these hooks for maybe 30 years, and they're my favourite long shank. And the beauty is, when I'm using a beach worm on a large long shank like this, I catch a whole variety of fish. Like, I catch a lot of bream and whiting, heaps of salmon, even trevally, luderick. You can catch mulloway. You can catch all of these fish with this size 2/0 long shank hook and a worm bait. When I'm specifically targeting Tailor off the beach, I will use a set of 3 4/0 ganged hooks. You can also use the ganged hooks when you're using slab baits. If you cut a piece of fish fillet, you can hook it with the ganged hooks, and that works really well for Tailor as well. And the main advantage of ganged hooks is that the Tailor won't bite you off like they would if you're using a single hook. It's very rare to get bitten off by a Tailor when using ganged hooks. If the Tailor happened to be really big, then you could increase the size of your ganged hooks to maybe, say, a size 5/0 or 6/0. When I'm fishing for mulloway off the beach using live bait, large slab baits or large squid baits, I use a 10/0 size hook most of the time, because mulloway have got a massive mouth, especially big mulloways. Their mouth is like huge. So a 10/0 hook can easily fit in a mulloway's mouth. And it's also super important to expose a lot of the barb of the hook. Often I'll also use a mustard suicide hook for mulloway as well. This is actually a 7/0 hook. If you're using just a moderate size squid bait or slab bait, I would use 2 of these. I'd tie one on the bottom and I'd have another hook just up a little bit higher. If you check out my 6 killer rigs video for beach fishing, it'll show you some of these rigs. When you are wanting to use one bait to potentially catch a range of different species of fish, I have a rig or a hook setup that is absolutely awesome. I've caught so many different species of fish on this setup. Here I have a size 4/0 suicide as my main hook, coupled with a size 4 stinger. So that's a 4/0 suicide and then just a number 4 stinger. This works really well with a half pilchard bait, a small fillet or slab bait, or a small squid bait. When I use a pilchard with this, I cut the pilchard in half, and you can use either the tail half or the head half. When I put the head half on, I put the main hook through the eyes of the pilchard, pull it all the way through and then pin it into the pilchard, and then I hook the stinger through the pilchard's mouth. It helps close the pilchard's mouth, and that's what I do with the head part of the pilchard. It's an absolutely fantastic rig, and you can catch so many different species on it. You catch Bream, Flathead, Tailor, Trevally, Salmon, Mulloway. The only drawback with this hook setup is Tailor will often bite you off. So what I used to do is fish this actual rig using a light wire trace. I always used to hate wire traces, but I found that when I used a wire trace with this rig, it really didn't make any difference. I still caught all of the species of fish, and if there were Tailor there, I didn't get bitten off. So this is an absolutely awesome hook setup for beach fishing. I hope that this video on hooks helps you to catch more fish. And remember to keep your eyes open for the next video in this series on beach fishing core learning, which is all about sinkers, what sinkers to use and why we use them. Please remember to like, subscribe and share this video with your friends. If you have any questions or requests for future videos, please put them in the comments. And until next time, all the best with your fishing.